And so the actual proposal was under the aegis of INTACH. This is INTACH GMC, Greater Mumbai chapter. It is me and my partner Sunita Samant that we undertook this study, and it was with the funding of the MMR Heritage Conservation Society, which started this funding in 1995 with a very small corpus, but then it grew so wide that today the entire MMR is listed. It's a very proud moment for Mumbai and the MMR Heritage Conservation Society. So it was called the Matheran Comprehensive Heritage Listing Proposal. And what it sought to do, and that was the instruction given to us by the MMR HCS, as I call it, the governors. And they said that Matheran is not in Mumbai. It's a very different case. It has a setting which is all green. It has a setting which is no cars. It is the only hill station in Asia which has got no cars. It's just a very, very ecologically sensitive place, and you might have to look at it in a very, very different way. So that is how the brief was given to us, and therefore it became an objective for us to decide as to exactly what are we going to do. And when we set foot on it, we knew that the task was immense. So enabling environment to sustain a healthy state of environment, that became our kind of the main objective, and it became a logo for us, and that is how we went ahead. And this is how Matheran looked and even looks now. You do see some of the buildings that have peaked up onto the tops of the forest, which is not a very good thing. But it has been stopped since then, and there are no more peakings of buildings beyond the top of the trees, basically. That is what the regulations have been in Matheran all these years, ever since the British identified it as a hill station, and a hill station which was pedestrian. So location mapping becomes extremely important. Matheran hill station, although it is a part of MMR region, it is a distance from Mumbai, and therefore a journey has to be taken to reach the plateau. And therefore this diagram actually shows how one can connect to Matheran. There are several ways. One is by rail. You can go up to Karjat, and you can go up to Neral. You can climb the hill by the mini railway, and you come up to Dasturi Naka, and then the rest of the journey is by foot. But if you come by train from Neral, then you can go up to the heart of the station on one edge of it, which is the bazaar. So that is how the journey begins. And you can see in all the subsequent slides, you'll realize that the entire region is green. It's a very unique setting for this little plateau. And we'll discuss it further, but that is how one can see that you can go by railway from up to Karjat, the Karjat local you can take. One can go up to Neral station, break your journey, take the mini railway. It is called the Matheran Light Railway. You can take that railway and go up. You can hike up, or you can go by a hired car, or you can drive up and park at the entrance location. And then the rest of it is by foot. It's completely a pedestrian journey. Topography. Topography is very important for places like Matheran. It's a hill, and therefore the principal aspect is to understand what the topography is. What are the slopes? What are the heights of these slopes? How deep is the escarpment? Are there ravines, or is it generally sloping ground? And so on. So that becomes an important. So a little close-up of, so it is the same MMR Heritage Conservation Society, and 1998, I'm saying here that it's quite a historic moment for our journey as well. It's almost 20 years. And one of the first things that we encountered was this a proposal by the government to have a new development plan. And the new development plan was actually asking uh, the development plan was asking for entry of cars inside. And therefore it was Mr. Morparia, as you all know him, or you might know him from the Times of India. And he made this little cartoon, and it said, "Sniff, sniff, mummy, what is that awful smell?" And the reply is, "It's fresh air, son, but don't worry, there are going to be cars here soon, and it will be just like our Bombay." So it was quite a funny, uh, uh, and we began our journey with that in mind, that we did not want any cars to come in, and that the development plan had to be kind of made to understand that it is not good for the sustainable development or the sustenance of the ecology of Matheran, and therefore it had to be stopped. And our study then began with, as I said, enabling environment to sustain a healthy state of affairs. We talked about this, and we talked about the linkage. We talked about the topography. And then the journey from Neral, if you come by road, it begins, and that is how you can see Matheran right in front of you. And it is always the most pleasant sight, whatever the climate condition may be. It's one of the best sights from the plateau right up to Matheran, as you can see it on top. And talking about the endeavor of the British, the rulers, the Raj, there were some maps which I have found and which have been mentioned in all the studies that have been undertaken in the aspects of hill stations in India. And this is from Resorts of the Raj, which is identifying highlands of the of India. And it says here that they always had their eye on identifying all the high up plains, something which is not at the sea level. One, also because they could not take the heat of the plains, and they were on a lookout for a climate which was like home away from home, which would keep mainly their soldiers at peace, because most of their soldiers used to die at a very early age. And so the quest for hill stations high up on the plateaus would keep them safe, and that was the quest that began. So health of a British soldier remained an important concern for the rulers, colonial rulers, throughout their stay. In optimizing a healthy tenure of the soldier, in whom the company invested huge amounts of money, resulted in establishments of hill stations in the country. Extensive medical reports were prepared during the time for the well-being of the British troops. And it was all linked with good health, to pure air, to home-like environment, away from the scorching heat of the plains. And ideal locations were identified, and the mountaintop sanatoria, as they were called, they were identified and developed. In British India, the place of residence, this might come as news to you, so I read it properly. In British India, the place of residence of an officer of a given district was called a station. A British officer was stationed at a place. Hence, these resorts of the Raj are popularly known as hill stations. That is how the name came up. And then, beginning modestly in the 19th century, the hill stations became major administrative seats for the British colonial rulers. The healthy home away from home environment of the hills lured the English away from the oppressive climate of the plains. And from 1864 onwards, almost all logic, against all logic, they decided to rule the country from Calcutta and Shimla on a timeshare basis. The two winter and summer capitals, respectively, are almost 1,700 kilometers apart. Noticing the benefits of such an arrangement, other presidencies followed suit. And soon, hill stations like Darjeeling, Mahabaleshwar, and Ooty became the summer headquarters of provincial administrations as well. And therefore, what you can see here is the geographical groups of Indian hill resorts. And you can see that about 80 established in 30 years between 1820 and 1850s. And in the Bombay group, Matheran, at a height of 2460 feet, was one of the last. In fact, according to the study that I have done, it is the last hill station founded by the British. So the administration of the hill was taken up mostly, and it was given in the hands of the superintendents. So this was a post which was really, it was specially created, and who since 1865 was invariably a member of the Indian Medical Service. The Matheran municipality was formulated in 1905 with president at its head as an elected head. The Matheran municipality in about 1920s, very, very important to understand, is mentioned to be one of the richest in the whole of the southern division. So it became so popular, possibly also because of its vicinity in Mumbai. Mumbai always has been the economic capital of the country ever since then. And so the journey began. And for the hill stations, the choosing of hill stations was a very simple and a very simplified matter. And it was simplified by the military department by developing a standard evaluation report describing the main points or aspects such as the general features, as you can see here, approaches and accessibility, the cost of the roads, healthiness of the roads, climate for sure, history of diseases such as cholera, because they were mighty afraid of cholera, because that was what was prevalent then. Just as we have COVID, we are all sitting at home. They used to have cholera, very prevalent. Availability of water was one of the prime concerns. Soil conditions, sites for barracks, naturally, because their soldiers were to stay there, the material for building, and flora and fauna. So all these became their prime concerns. What you can see here in this picture is that on the right hand side, what you see is that Matheran is only an outliner of the main Sahyadri range. And the distance is mentioned here. So the plateau is an outliner of the main Sahyadri range, stands on its own at a distance of about 20 kilometers from the Sahyadris and at about 48 kilometers from the Arabian Sea. And yet it is a very prominent plateau at a great height. At 64 kilometers southeast of Mumbai, that is its location. Within its municipal limits and measuring 17.2 square kilometers, a very tiny station. The profile that you see here on the right hand side basically is not the Matheran plateau itself, but it is the entire range of hills. Higher up is the plateau, lower down you go to all the other smaller hills. And this actually is identified as the eco-sensitive zone today. And this I've taken from a very old map, actually. So we are very fortunate. It's the same area which has been demarcated today as eco-sensitive zone. The general height of the plateau is about 759. This is a comparison with the Deccan Plateau and the highest point on Matheran. And you can see that the highest Rugby point actually is even higher than the general height of the Ghats, of the Sahyadri Ghats. So it's quite an impressive kind of a height, in spite of it being an outliner of the topography and the general outline. So this is one of the first maps that we made, and this was a hand-done map because for a very long time, as I said, we did not get the maps at all, and there was no reference. The only maps that we got from the development plan, which was not such a good plan to look at or to even consider for finalization. So we found a very old map from the forest department, and then we hand traced it and made this map and marked on it the topographical features, because this map actually was a part of the original Survey of India map from the great trigonomic survey that happened in India. And it was in a very bad state, all in tatters, completely torn down. I remember my students who had joined me then are also today participating in this talk from all over 20 years hence. And we had a tough time to do this, to make this map. But so there's a book which is written by a resident of Matheran, Dino Bastawala. And she, in her book, says that the general outline of the plateau is interestingly likened to a fish hung over the fisherman's shoulder. The central bone running as a ridge from Panorama Point, which is in the north, to the highest point in the center at the Church of England Plateau, which is the height that I just mentioned at 2636 feet. Another ridge runs down from the Olympia riding grounds to Chowk, which is completely in the south, while the ridge runs along the western fin. The three meet to form a declivity of the natural bund, which was found by Mallet during his first ascent. And you know for sure, it has to be the Charlotte Lake. He only located the declivity, he found a spring, and he knew that water can be collected in this, and in the future it can be harnessed, and it can become a water tank. So the whole of its surface is undulating, irregular, narrow, uneven tableland. Not very undulating, it's quite fathomable, but yet, because it's a hill, it has its own little ups and downs and ascents and descents. It makes a very interesting place to be in. Although very little information is available of how stations were planned. But when you look at all the stations today, they are either like the English countryside or they are like little English towns. So these are the only two configurations that one can describe. And it was all to the taste of the British because they had left the country. They were thousands and thousands of miles away from their own country. I may be wrong about the thousands, but so they were far away from their homeland. And so they wanted it to be designed as per their homeland in the way their homes were designed. Here what you see is Rudyard Kipling. This again I've taken from Resorts of the Raj, and I talked about cholera. It's a very interesting anecdote, a kind of a little poem, if you can call that. And it says, when the cholera comes as it will past doubt, keep out of the wet and don't go on the shout. For the sickness gets in as the liquor dies out and it crumbles the young soldier. Crumbles the soldier. But the worst of your foes in the sun overhead, you must wear your helmet for all that is said. If you finds you uncovered, it'll knock you down dead. And you'll die like a fool of a soldier. A fool of a soldier. And therefore they were very, very keen that cholera doesn't strike them. These are some of the old lithographs that I found. And these are there in almost all the books. You can even find them online. It is not a very great find in that case, in that way, but they are extremely accurate and has a huge quality. And found some more from a handbook. This I found just about 3 days back, Picturesque India. Somebody has sketched these ravines. And this is the final map that we made. Eventually, we had it rasterized, put it into AutoCAD and things like that. And you see the final map here. So as I was saying that there is a very little information on how the stations were planned. And most of the regulations, they differed a little bit here and there. The regulations that Mallet found, Hugh Mallet, who was a founder of Matheran, it read in very simple terms as, he said that no allotment is to exceed 5 acres. No one is to obstruct by fence or buildings the road to or enclose any surface spring. Houses should not be allowed to come up very close to roads or to springs. So these are some of the most simple regulations. And here you can see that The northern hill stations, if you really look at them, they were all designed like if you look at Shimla and Mussoorie, they were likened to an English village, whereas Matheran is so much set into the forest and so very like the English countryside. So there is that difference between the two settings. And the setting up of Matheran. So if you look at Mussoorie, if you look at any other hill station, they have this central area which is called the mall. And it is this mall that people take a respite in. They take the chances to meet people who have come to the station and so on. In the case of Matheran, the chance was minimized because the flat area, a more flatter plain, was available only on the eastern fringe of the station. And therefore, what you see here is on the left, you see the entire topographical map and showing all the heights, etc. But when you look at the central area, which is white, which is the highest part, and onto the right of it is located the bazaar. And this becomes a physiological heart, which is the bazaar, and this actually behaves like a mall in the station. So that is how Matheran was planned. And in this planning, all the residents who were locals, in the sense all the Gautans, all the local villages, and they belonged to various castes and creeds, and they were the troops, in fact, who took care of the British when they came into the station. So they were really the helping hand, and the natives, if you can call them, they were not really natives, because there were no natives found excepting the Dhangars and the people who came up to the hill once in a while for grazing, etc. But there were no residents found by Mallet on the. And these people definitely were migrants. They came from the plains, but then they were allowed to settle into this bazaar, into different patches of lands which were dedicated to, say, for instance, the Chamars, the Mahars. And so they were dedicated trades, and they settled down here. And it is they who became the helping hands of the people who came into Matheran to have their joyous journeys. So that is how the story goes. As far as planning goes, the plots of the bazaar were much more smaller than the rest of Matheran. It is exactly these words that I said. So the plots which were carved out in the bazaar, in these bazaar area for the residents of the local residents, they are called bazaar plots. They are much smaller in size. And all the rest of the plots which were carved out in Matheran, they were designated legally as Matheran plots. So that is how the planning began. The first 5 bungalows were set up by Mallet, Hugh Poyntz Mallet, and his brothers. And this came up in just the first 3 years. So you see all 5 of them here. So the first one on the left is the Bike Hotel, which was Hugh Mallet's own bungalow. Then you have Captain Barr's bungalow, which is called the Bar. A very close relative. All of them were from the army, and therefore you can see the names as captains, and most of them are captains, generals, honorable, and so on. And you have Captain Walker's, the Walker's cottage, which is today the Tour Petit bungalow. You had the brother of Mallet, Honorable Arthur Mallet's bungalow, which was Stonehenge, which later became the Ready-Money Lodge. It still is a Ready-Money Lodge. And then you have Mr. Fawcett's bungalow, which is the Hermitage. So these are the first 5 bungalows which are set up in just 3 years. You can imagine a station, a plateau high up on the mountains, no access. It was only by foot. At that point of time, it was only by horses. They had to carve out their roads and so on. And yet, they could make, just in 3 years, a huge progress, not only in planning the station, identifying the roads, carrying out surveys, in making these first 5 small cottages. When I say bungalows, they became bungalows later on. But in the initial stages, they were very, very modest, small cottages. And so I'll take you through them very quickly. So this is Redimini Lodge. This is how it looks today. It followed the pattern and aspirations of British designs and so on, and expanded over a period of time. This one is the bar house. This is a state in which we found them. I'll quickly go through bar house because in 2001, I did the restoration, so I have some documentation. It was converted into a heritage hotel. And so this is the documentation of the place. You can see a little before and afters. In a very, very bad state, and it could be revived to the before and after. This is a black and white photo, but it is after revival, and the foreigners came back. May not be the British, but they came back. It became one of the first examples of restorations and how restorations can be undertaken using conservation methods. And just to imply here that at that point of time, it was not listed, there was no list existing, and it was only people who were conscious. So Nimrana Hotels had taken this up, and Nimrana Hotels proprietors have remained founding members of INTACH in India. I think all of you know what INTACH is about. And so then they hired my services because they wanted it to be done in the conservation way. In the end of this session, I'll show you a huge amount of progress the locals have taken up from that one example and done marvelous jobs in restoration of other bungalows. The Hermitage, as the name suggests, although it was initially Mr. Fawcett's bungalow, it eventually became a hermitage. So it was the sister superiors who were in charge. And you can even see a small chapel there, which still stands. Today, there's a change of hands, a lot of surreptitious bargains happening, no restoration happening. It is in a poor state of repair. Captain Walker's cottage became, fortunately, the tour petite bungalow. It is the petites who took over. And they took over, mind you, from the Sassoons. And there are 4 or 5 major properties around this Rugby plateau, as we have identified it, which belong to the Sassoons. And they sold it later on when they were leaving the country. So it was at that point of time that the Petit family, it doesn't need much describing as to who the Petits are, but we can discuss it a little later. So this was a tour Petit bungalow. And what you see here in the lower left, this was a small cottage which was set up by Walker, Captain Walker. The rest of it that you see is an expansion by the Petits. And once again, a tower in the Tudor style. So there were aspirations to follow these kind of. The first set of mapping which happened in 1867, so this was the first map that was almost like hand drawn. And this was a map which was then followed up by Lord Elphinstone and the rest of the layouts and carving out of the roads, carving out of the plots, giving them a proper identity, giving them regulations followed. So, and you can see here in the enlargement, if you look at Fawcett's bungalow here, and you can see a Dhangar Wada here, Captain Barr's bungalow here, and somewhere down here is Mallet's bungalow. So this was a time when the first 5 bungalows had been set up. A little bit about Elphinstone, Lord Elphinstone. It is said that when he joined service and he was a governor of Mumbai, I don't know how true it is because in those days travel from Mumbai was not very easy. There were no roads, there were no trains, And it is mentioned in the books that it would take almost 3 to 4 days to go up the hill. And the hill was not approached from Neral, it was approached from the One Tree Hill, which was the original ascent of Matheran. I'll show those maps a little later. I think I missed to indicate it in the topographical map, but it'll come up again. So, and he set up this little cottage, Elphinstone Lodge. Elphinstone Lodge also changed hands later on, and it was expanded surely, just like the rest of the bungalows. And initially it was a very, very modest cottage. What you see in the plan above is something to note. If you look at the plotting, which is on the right-hand side, they are much smaller than the plot of the Elphinstone Lodge. So it's the largest plot on Matheran, 22 acres of a property. And it is because of this reason. And if you see the footprint of the bungalow, it is very, very tiny. The rest of it is a forest, a very thick forest. And Monkey Point is so very close to this place. And you regularly get visited by different tribes of monkeys here. You cannot venture out into the thicket at all. You can be attacked by the monkeys. So it is that kind of a situation. So Elphinstone Lodge and Lord Elphinstone's contribution to Matheran, I think, is one of the most noteworthy. It was he who spearheaded the entire planning of the station, and then, of course, he went back onto his separate journey. So, looking at connectivity to Matheran, Matheran eventually was connected by roadways and by rails, and the first stretch of railway line in India was opened in 1850, and that ran between Bombay and Thane. Soon after, this line was extended to Pune. So this is not any news to us. We know about this history, and it was to this line that Adamji Pirbhoi, at that point of time, Adamji Pirbhoi is a little known personality today. At that point of time, he was a philanthropist. His philanthropy equaled Jamshedji Tata. It was that big of a philanthropy. And at some point of time, everything was lost out. He lost out all his assets. Even today, I don't know if Ali Akbar Adamji Pirbhoi, who is his great-grandson, if he's listening to this, he was the one who educated me on this great gentleman, and he gave me a scrapbook which told me about so many stories. And it was he and his son who set up this great Matheran steam rail. So that is his image. It went on. Today it has gone on to sit on the World Heritage Site tentative list, along with Darjeeling, Nilgiri, Kalka, Shimla, and so on. But it's still a long way to go. The mountain railways. So there was a little description here as to how World Heritage is listed. So I will not go into these details. It can be understood later on. I will try and finish the session, and then maybe, if time permits, we can go back to this. But Mountain Railways of India and its connection with UNESCO being listed as World Heritage Site is a very proud moment for Indian Railways. 3 of them are already on the World Heritage list, and Matheran tried and tried very hard, but missed out. It is still on the tentative list, hopefully, and hope one day the railway takes some interest again and it gets done. The road was built much before. So the railway came up in 1907, but the road was built, a Kacha road, of course, in 1857 to 1859, more or less. There are different records available. But so you can imagine that after 1850s of the founding of the station, in just about 7 years, the first Kacha road had come up, and therefore the entire journey changed its direction. Instead of coming from the south, up from the Chowk hill, people started coming up from Neral, because it was eventually connected to the railway line of the regular Peninsular Railway. And this is how picturesque it is. So the story here of Adamji Pirboy is an endless one. There is a little booklet which the cover I showed of. A very, very interesting storyline of Adamji Pirboy and the journey that he took, and at his own expense, that he did this entire construction. It was a huge feat at that point of time. All the machines, all the know-how, all the expertise and the technical know-how was brought in from Germany by hiring special engineers and so on. A huge feat. How can one not recognize this as a combination of the tangible and the intangible? It was this that gave huge access to the station as we get it today. And it's a most enjoyable journey. So these are the plaques which were put up at the station. These two plaques that you see are on Matheran. They are not at Nehru. So both these plaques are at Matheran at two different dates. 1983 plaque was a huge tussle by his great-grandson, who insisted that the plaque be put up there so that people of Matheran would know about it. And what you see below is a little tile, which is a roof tile. And when we were doing the survey of Matheran, my guys who are sitting here today watching this presentation, I think one of them found this, and it was a ridge tile on the roof. And there were plenty of them, but they were all broken. We could only find one. And you can see how important the railway must have been at that point of time, that it became an emblem on the roof tile, a day-to-day kind of. Not that anybody could see it on the roof, but to put it there itself is of a huge value. It indicates a huge amount of cultural significance. Most of these engines today, they are lying scattered here and there. So the National Railway Museum at Delhi is housing this. At some point of time in 1932, the typology of the wagons had changed, and they had this built up like a small bus. And this was specially hired by the rich of the station, who will hire it only for themselves. And they would go up the hill. But it was in 1932. This is still seen in the National Railway Museum. These photographs are taken by me, myself, when I went to the museum. And to my great delight, it was still there. And then you have all these historic images. And you can really see the bus there on the top left and on the right. And the historic picture. The right-hand side is in Matheran, at the station itself. And after 46 years, the mechanical department of the Indian Railways tried to revive this journey of the steam railway and also of the rail bus. And there's recently in 2007, a special stamp was issued in the memory of this great gentleman. And here, this picture, you should notice that while the train is chugging through just 2 feet in width of the railway track, and right on top up there, you see a bungalow. That bungalow belonged to Adamji Pirboy himself. Even today it belongs to him. It's called the Chalet. Some more images. These are some locals, and on the left, some more images. And you can see the Kacha road here, the one that I was talking about. So this is showing that Kacha road. And this is one of the inhabitants of the general area. There is a description given in the picture. And on that Kacha road, this is how people must have traveled. In fact, history books say that this was the way that they traveled for all those years. So Jampans and Dandis and Manchils and things like that. These are the names given in different hill stations of the country. This one is not from Matheran, but this would have been the methods. And the Memsahids would then travel in palanquins like these. This is from Matheran Hill. being a pedestrian station, it was always using this kind of a convey people to access, people to themselves travel, or to carry goods and things like that. And the horses and the ponies were surely there. Some people of Matheran, I have been able to identify most of them, but some of the most prominent ones I can see is Jimmy Lord, who's sitting here, the spectacled gentleman here, owner of the Lord Hotel, one of the finest hotels ever in Matheran. Even today, although I have restored Bar House, I don't get an easy access to that hotel. In Zenobia, who's still around, and she welcomes me with both hands. I think she's in the audience. Hopefully, she's listening to this. A huge tribute to people like these who protected Matheran. It was they who formed the Matheran Bachao Samiti. What you see here in the first picture on the left, the lady in the front row, the second person on the left, is Pilu Richardson. And it is this fiery lady who set up the Matheran Bachao Samiti, and it was they who approached INTACH. So the whole journey of identification, designation, recognizing the cultural significance and the values, etc., was because of the Matheran Bachao Samiti, who then joined hands with BEAG, which is the Bombay Environmental Action Group, and then they approached us and then we worked together. So it was the people of Matheran and professionals like me who worked together on this project. And the success story is quite big. So here you can see Pilu quite close up. A very handsome lady. Pilu Richardson, she was married to a British, and the bungalow that she lived in, which she owned, she still owns that bungalow. It's called the Prabal for some reason. And she got it as a gift on her birth. The day she was born, her father gave it to her as a birth gift. And she protected it all her life. Sadly, she's no more. And again, Jimmy Lord in the rear row, the first on the right-hand side, he is also no more. But my entire journey of the study was with these two people and with Zenobia Lord, who's still with me. Many interesting personalities. You can see Adamji Peerboy's descendants here on the right-hand side. And they are welcoming their Imam, or what they call Sadruddin Tayyabji, Ismail. So these are the great stalwarts of Matheran. I found them in an old photo studio in Matheran Bazaar. And when I went to him to ask for old pictures, he said, I'm shutting down my studio. I'm too old. I cannot maintain it. So you take whatever you want. And that is how I got this khazana. And then there were also other maps which were made by different people. These became part of books. So what you see on the left-hand side is from a book which is one of the best books ever written on Matheran. A little later, of course, than the other earlier books. It was written in 1905 by Mrs. A.K. Oliver. And this map is from that book. It is actually these books that helped us to build up a chronological setup of the bungalows. How did we come to know that they were the first 5? How did we know that they were of the next phase? And how did we know that they would be from the various different phases? So it was so many of these references and books. You can see the list there. We collated all this list together. No doubt we took 3 years for the entire journey, but eventually we were able to crack it. And this was a map which is from the Survey of India. This was a map that we were waiting for all those 3 years, and we didn't get it. We got it only after we finished the entire journey. And after, I think even after the list came out. So we were like so happy to have this. And I put it up as a big map in my office even today. So this map measures in height 7 feet. So it's a big map. A lot of history connected to the survey of India. The great trigonomic survey of India is a historic moment. It was supposed to be, not supposed to be, it even today is the most scientific survey ever undertaken in the world. When you compare it with the date and time that it was done, it is one of the great surveys. There are books written on it, and Everest, it was Everest who was associated with this great trigonomic survey, and it is in his name that the Mount Everest is named. So it's a huge kind of a connection with this little map that we were longing to have. So the topographic map appears here again. It doesn't show the ascent, but these are the other maps. So what we did was we made 3 main maps. So we made a topographic map, which made us understand the planning system. The British were so clever, and they were so concerned with the sustainability and the ecology of the hill. You will be surprised to find that every bungalow, and mind you, every bungalow, there is no concession in it. All these 420 odd bungalows were sited in a way that they would not do cutting of any part of the hill. And this was a huge understanding that we had to derive, and therefore topographic map was important for us. And so we made a topographic map, we made a land use map, and eventually what you see here, we converted the topographic map into simple lines without the color or anything, any gradation in it. And we divided it into recognizable zones. And each of the zones were in identifiable landmarks so that we could put them on a marker. This is the typical character of Matheran, undoubtedly ecologically sensitive. The study went on to formulate, I will not go into details. What you can concentrate on is the nice pictures on the right-hand side. So all these assets were identified. The first 5 bungalows on Matheran were given a special grading. The list was grade 2 and grade 2A. And as it went ahead, they became lesser in significance, lesser in size, lesser in style, and more in number, and so on. And they started to get classified. The middle one that you see, the grill that you see, is Elphinstone Lodge. The bottom eaves detail that you see is Golestan Bungalow, and so on. Huge values to each of those. We studied it at 4 different levels. Why would one study it at the regional level? We were not asked to do that. But when we looked at the setting, we realized that we'll have to look at the farther setting of the region, because it was only then we would understand what is the consequence, ecological consequence of this tiny plateau onto the surrounding region. And this actually, the study then went on to classify the Matheran eco-sensitive zone. So we studied it at various levels. What you see here is what we named as the region, and I gave it a title, both of us, me and Sunita. We thought that we should name it by recognizable names, the names that are known to people. And so it was called the Matheran Malangad eco-sensitive zone. The boundary, black boundary that you see, is the ecozone that we identified. Of course, it didn't get notified as to this extent, but at least the dark green that you see, that was the reserved forest area. And on the north is a Malangad peak, and this got classified today, and I'll show you a map. So all character appraisals, we call it technically character appraisals, which are done in detail so that we identify it in the first place, we evaluate it secondly, we give it a classification, give it values, and put it on the table for designation. So you see here, so the ascent was from the north. So that is how people used to enter, sorry, from the south. So the Mallet's ascent was from One Tree Hill. He came up from here, found the hill, found the spring and went back, and then he came back. And he came back from Rambagh, which is a path which is here. And he came into this path, identified the whole. When the road came up from Neral at this point. The train came all the way around Panorama and entered the station at the village. So it has been quite a journey. We identified the bazaar as special zones for various reasons because it was actually bursting at the seams and it needed more control. And so we thought we should identify them as precincts, as heritage precincts. That never came to be, sadly. So there are only individual listings. And you can see how the plots were defined. None of the buildings were along the road. So when you walk anywhere in Matheran, the buildings, the bungalows are hidden inside the deep forest. You don't see them. And that was the idea of planning. So you can see that in the bazaar today, even then, although the map on the top shows that it was for individual trade, which was self-sufficient. Today it is, or when we started the survey in 1998, it was already overgrown. And it is going right up to the escarpments. I have not gone inside the bazaar for quite a long time, but I'm sure it has grown further. So as I explained earlier, this is a central spine. Everything happens here. It's quite undulating, excepting in the lower right-hand side picture that you see. It is taken from the mosque. And you can see how deep the escarpment is. The road is much below. And it is at this road that the bazaar came up. And it was actually carved out, partly excavated so that you create a plane where people can function easily. So the day-to-day activities of the bazaar can happen and it can take place very easily. I don't want to get into this, it's quite technical, but cultural significance is a very, very scientific methodology. It has to be undertaken mainly so that you are on a sure footage. So tomorrow, if somebody questions your listing, somebody goes to court, somebody says, oh, how do you list my bungalow just because it is a little fencing that is decorative or a balcony which is decorative, and you should not list it. And then to give a kind of a defense mechanism to that, internationally, this kind of a selection criteria is undertaken. It is a kind of a matrix which is created and it is applied to all the buildings. All 420 buildings went through this, and the list card is produced. This is a list card which is in the international format. Mumbai was making it for the first time. And this list card was then adopted by MMRHCS for all its other list cards that have come up, excepting that I followed the English pattern because of my little training that I had in England. But today this list card goes into multiple pages for reasons which came about by experience by the MMRHCS, and it has been a wonderful exercise. Some beautiful bungalows. I'll show you quickly the interiors. The Craigie barn that you see on the left-hand side, interestingly, has also been restored. It has been restored by an architect all of you know very well, Vikas Dilavri, and this went for a UNESCO award, and they have a UNESCO award. So Matheran also is a recipient of a UNESCO award because of the kind of technical conservation methods used by a conservation architect who's trained in it and who has his heart in the right place. So hats off to people like Vikas. The bungalow on the right-hand side is Gulistan. It boasts of the longest veranda, 75 meters of length of a veranda which overlooks the Arthur seat, which is at the bottom, and some more. look at the exquisite furniture in the setting of the bungalows. All these bungalows exist. The nice roof that you see here is Gulistan. The roof that you see at the bottom is Craigieburn, the same bungalow. The one on the left with those hipped roofs is a hotel in the bazaar. And the lamps that you see here is bar house. This lamp we found in a very bad state. We have restored it. It is still there and is functioning. And this desk is P.L. Richardson's desk. It still exists. So listing was done to natural points, and all the natural points in some of the roads in the railway line was identified as grade 1. No other buildings were identified for different reasons. This is a part of a later exercise which was done to create a street furniture manual. And in the street furniture manual, different components of the hill were identified. And it was for the first time that we were able to identify the exact extent of a point, the viewing points as we call them. So we marked out, the team identified was hired by the Matheran Heritage Committee. It was from the college again, Pillai's College of Architecture, and they did this exercise. So all the points which have been listed, 195 points, were identified for the list as grade 1, and all these now have a street furniture manual in detail. Some of the lesser bungalows, but when I say lesser, they are from the size, the style, and so on. So within this features also the Elphinstone bungalow, which is in the middle one, the right-hand side. The top one is Chalet, the bottom one is Maldunga House. And still lesser and lesser and lesser bungalows, but all of them have been listed. So you can see that these are very, very tiny cottages. These came up mostly along the Kasturba Gandhi Road, which earlier would have been the Mary Road or the Mary Lane. So the King Edward Road became Mahatma Gandhi Road, and Mary Lane became Kasturba Gandhi Road. So of the total 420 plots, 190 were identified. Plots were identified for listing. Natural points, I think I'm wrong about this figure, but all the natural points were identified. The Matheran Light Railway was identified as grade 1. And this paved the path for considering conservation as a tenet to sustainable development of any place. Conservation could become a tenet to sustainable development, and that is the path that we need to understand. So here you have a list card for a building, and you have a list cards for, on the right hand side, it is for natural points. There were many issues that we found at that point of time. So buildings were being demolished, the bazaar was overgrowing, there were no plots, and the rest of, so whatever were the plots, they were the revenue plots, and they were all on lease. The entire hill station is on a collector lease. So whatever is a residue from those plots actually belongs to the forest, and therefore the forest needs to control it. But for whatever reasons, that has not happened. It is still not happening today. And so there is an overgrowth in certain sections. This bungalow was right in the bazaar at the main chowk, and it was being demolished when we set foot on Matheran for the survey, and this is what became of it on the right hand side. So this is what happens, aspirations of people. Design is a way of life. Design, if it is following the context, nothing goes wrong. And I wish that architects get, and I'm sorry to say this, there are many architects sitting here in this session, and I really wish that they get the lessons right, and they get to understand that design always has to be as per the setting, as per the existing setting. Why should one violate the setting? And so these were further aspirations. All this was happening in 1998. That's why I put the date there. Matheran hardly has any water. On a hill, water supply has always been very, very minuscule. And yet we have swimming pools, and because that is what people want. It is very important that people understand how different Matheran is and what is its value. It is a pedestrian station, and one needs to walk on that station, so on. So these are all. There was other issues like a complete neglect because of economic hardships, because of ownership patterns, and so on. So many of the most beautiful bungalows became like this. Olympia House, once upon a time, must have been a magnificent structure. Evert Lodge, it was so beautiful. Today it is completely crumpled. And so happened this proposal to identify the Matheran Malangat zone. Today it has been reduced. Note this area, and you can see the reduction. So the eco-sensitive zone notification then eventually identified an area of only 251. I'm saying only, but still a substantial area, and nothing to cry about. So 251.56 with a buffer zone of 200 meters. This was all the infrastructure that came up very early, right from the onset. So Charlotte Lake, the Charlotte Lake and the plaque on it with all infrastructure. The other tank is Walker's tank. And then you have the Rugby Plateau with the Paymaster Park. So there were many parks which were constructed on the hill, formal parks. So to break away from the informality. And then you had all these beautiful attributes to people who contributed to these setting up and things like that. So Sorabji Pandey and his history, 30 years as a municipal councillor and a managing director of Matheran's steam railway. All these three are on the park, on the Paymaster Park as it was called. And there's history of contribution of Mr. Paymaster. In memory of Hugh Poyntz Mellett, the founder of Matheran. And these are the four sides of that pedestal. Talks about the history. Mr. Lieutenant Colonel Beramji Barjorji Paymaster, Superintendent of Matheran and President of the municipality from 1922 to 27, and a huge contribution. Some cemeteries, these have been identified by us as archaeological sites. They're in a complete ruin, not accessible. I don't think Matheran people, most of them even know about its existence. Some of them have been protected simply because they are overgrown with thicket. We have ventured into this. I could not put all the pictures here, but to say that these cemeteries, out of these, the Hindu crematorium on the lower side and the Parsi crematorium, both these are in a working condition even today. Very sad. The Great Church of England, this is what happened to it. The people in care sold off the roof, and the timber went and the roof went, and then the vagaries of time took over. What you see on the right-hand side lower corner is a very early tomb of a child, and there are two of them on the site. The only means of tires that travel on the hill, on the plateau, is the ambulance, which is officially allowed. There are various proposals which were undertaken by the Matheran Hill Station Municipal Council via all the development plans that were set up. Some were opposed, some were allowed to go through. And the first notice, or the first notification of the eco-sensitive zone, after a few years of that, the high-level monitoring committee was set up, and that started to control all kinds of control mechanisms that were required, which were conducive to the ecological setting of the entire eco-sensitive zone, which goes beyond the plateau of the municipality area. This is very important because one of the things that was identified was, in spite of the plots which are revenue plots and they mark a boundary, and that is a plot which is leased to the owners, when you really look at the forest cover, you find that out of the total plot area, the built up area, that is a footprint of the buildings, are very, very tiny. The rest of it is still a forest. But because they are within the revenue plots, how do you recognize them and how do you control them? And therefore, this kind of a mechanism was adopted. This was first adopted in Mathera, in Mahabaleshwar, and it is called the Vansadrushya area. So they are like to like forest areas. And these were classified, surveyed, identified, and a proclamation was given to say that these shall never be intervened into. There'll be no buildings built on that, so that the essential forest cover of Matheran is still maintained. And so this was a tourism master plan which was set up tourism development plan, which was done by specialist consultants. And this, the principal identification here that I would like to share is that they very clearly stated that the carrying capacity of the hill is already reached and it is way beyond. There is no place for any more capacity in Matheran. In fact, there is a need to reduce, and a mechanism has to be set up to control the onslaught of tourists on this ecological sensitive place. The street furniture manual, a few glimpses, detailed designs. Horses and their management have always been a huge crisis on the hill. There are licensed horses and unlicensed horses which ply. They are very, very necessary for plying on the hill. But at the same time, there needs to be a control, because if they are tied up here and there in the forest, they rub their body against the bark of the tree, which then becomes poisonous, and then eventually the tree dies. There are many areas which have been rendered redundant, devoid of forest because of this activity. A huge exercise undertaken. I don't want to show the details purposely here, but the entire bazaar spine is detailed for elevations of the facades. How do you do signboards and things like that? How do you, and what design do you construct the lampposts? Because the width of the streets in the whole station differs. There are different widths. There are different forest covers. There's a different canopy of trees on every street and so on. And so in response to that, the design was made. Once again, how the points could be designed. This was a very interesting feature. Garbage disposal on the hill has been a major hassle. Even if you put it into bins, it is a monkeys which invade into it and then they litter the whole street. And so we had come across a contemporary somewhere in Australia, I believe, where they had designed a litter bin which was bear proof, BEAR, the animal bear. And so we thought if we can take up that as a kind of a example, then we can design a monkey proof bin. People who have designed it, some of them are listening to me here. They can correct me if required later on, of course. And then you have this whole onslaught of cars which come up to Dasturi and they park there. But they park all the way up to Panorama Point. In the plans, you can see how they go into the forest area. So Matheran, the forest on the hill, the Mathavarsha Dongar, it is simply because of this geological condition of the plateau, which gives rise to this evergreen and semi-evergreen vegetation. And because the geological condition down the slopes is not the same, you have the forest only on the Matha, which is on the top of the hill. And this was a detailed study done by a group of environmentalists and ecologists who eventually we put them up on the high-level monitoring committee as experts, and they gave their advice and did their bit. This appears again. This was a critical study done by us. When I say us, it was by the ecologists under the helm of the high-level monitoring committee. There was a proposal which was already undertaken at the Charlotte Lake, and there was some misgivings undertaken as a project, and so we had to rectify that. You can see it here very clearly. I am still very unhappy about it. The drainage built in the systems built in laterite, and which must have lasted for 150 years. Suddenly, they've come out in concrete, and we didn't see any reason as to why that had to change. The ecologist had ample reasons to do so, but we thought that one could have been a little more sensitive. Sensitivity required here as well. In the name of the soil of the sun, there were some accidents in Matheran where people had crossed over the boundaries, and there were accidents, there are stories where people were thrown overboard and killed or something, all kinds of stories, and this is what happened. So all the points have now this kind of a fencing. So certain enablers, I will not go into this, by the Heritage Committee and by the Monitoring Committee, which were taken up, all in the cause of enhancement and to control development, which was going in the wrong direction. And so design control and regulations, which involved, for the first time, the urbanscape, materials, architectural details, signs and signages, boundary walls and fencings, and street furniture. This found place in the regulations for the first time ever. I don't think this is there also in Mumbai. So it was quite a victory for BEAG, who went about doing all this. I was only sitting behind and assisting, but a major victory here. Mr. Kokre, Ramdas Kokre, who was an officiating chief officer, we had been juggling with clearing the debris and the collection of the waste for last 10 years, even in our post under the high-level monitoring committee and the heritage committee. I don't know what he did, but he's a wizard. And he cleared it and made Matheran a plastic-free zone. He has a mantra to it, as he says. And he claims that he will do it wherever he goes. I think this mantra should be followed by one and all. He is now posted in Kalyan, so best of luck to Kalyan. Some more images coming up. These are, yes, so one of the anecdotes, very famous anecdote, Rudyard Kipling was recouping from, I think, chicken pox. That is a story. In this Wallace bungalow. Wallace bungalow is a British bungalow belonging to the Wallace flour mills. In fact, it was this group which then formulated a very handsome corpus of funding for students to go abroad and study the arts. And it was this that I received in 1995 when I went to England. So a lot of stories here. And we were just told that in this bungalow, because we came to know about it, so we went hunting, and we were told by somebody in Matheran that, oh, he has scribbled on the wall, why don't you go and have a look? We went there, and to our dismay, the Mali tells me that, ha madam, ite hota. But ami atas paint kela 7 divas sale. So it was all covered up, and we didn't get our hands at it. So, sorry about my Marathi, but this is what happened. Some beautiful examples of bungalows, just quick. This is the Bairamji Chijiboy Hospital, another handsome contribution by the Parsi patrons. The Lord Hotel, still stands supreme. I really love it. Evert Lodge in a bad state, many more bungalows. Now here starts the journey of, this is the before of the Bella Vista, and here you'll see the new. This is what it is today. Manoj Khedkar, who's, I think, listening to me, he shared these with me. He's a local civil engineer, very, very keen on Matheran. And he has now started, not now, almost 10 years back, he started this journey to restore conducively. So again, this is before and after Goldcroft. This is Satyanivas. Look at such an ordinary bungalow it is when you look at these pictures. And then look at this. This is what can happen. And this is that image once again, and I would like to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirtida. It was a fascinating journey across several decades. And you made it come alive somewhat with involving your manufacturers of the bear-proof bins and your hoteliers and all the people you worked with. There are many, many questions. I've tried to club them together. I'd begin by asking you, what makes an architect a good conservationist?
I think it is just a built-in.
You were starting to tell us what makes an architect a good conservationist.
Yeah, so if you look at actually my story, myself.
Yes.
I said earlier on that I was not trained. I entered into it by default.
Mm-hmm.
So Mumbai and India, as we know, it has been a latecomer in the field of protection of heritage and heritage conservation per se.
Mm-hmm.
It was only in 1995 that the first regulation came up and then spread into. But then it was the sensitivity of not only architects, but people who care about, people who have gone around the world and admired the respect with which heritage is conserved. And so, as an architect, I steered myself into understanding what history is all about. So, and my journey, even as a student, I used to like history, but the way it is taught in architectural colleges, it was quite disconnected. And it was quite to my surprise that when I went into the formal training a little later, the linking up of the historicity of the assets, whether they are tangible, intangible, whatever they are, these links, if they can combine to formulate values technically, then there is a way out. So as far as the answer goes, it is simple sensitivity.
Sensitivity is the key. Okay.
That is the key.
Okay. A couple of questions were, are any of you Mallet's recommendations still part of the framework within which Matheran operates?
Yeah, an interesting question. Actually, what I read out, that became an ordinance, actually. 1957 or 54, that is a date. And all of it got translated into the leaseholders cards. So it is very much there.
Okay.
The entire set of regulations and whatever was being disturbed, like I just discussed the Vana Sadrusha areas, where the forest was within a part of the plot. And it was likelihood if the FSI is increased and people would start constructing, where would they build? And so they would build as a right into the forest because they would think that the plot is leased to him and therefore it is his right to build on it. But if you look at the conditions of the lease card, it very strictly tells you that you cannot do that. You cannot even dig into the ground without the permission of the forest department. So what they did was, they said that you are a leaseholder. The building is kind of, you can have the permission to build the building. Your ownership remains strictly to the building and not to the land. So that is what happened. And this is written down in the leasehold. So we could procure some old leasehold cards, and we read through. And that is what came of help. It is in one of these ordinances that it proclaims that there shall never be any wheels, WHEELS, or tires on the plateau.
Oh, great. So Malik's recommendations do survive in some form. We have a question from Commander Johnson, a keen Navy heritage person.
Yes, Commander. Good evening.
Commander wants to know if there are any maritime connections that you discovered in Matheran.
There was a maritime club. I'm forgetting the new name for it. So it was, the building's name was Maritime Club. There was no direct connection because it's so far away from any sources of water. But so this club functioned as a club of maritime professionals, maybe.
Okay.
And I'm sure I have some history on it. But yes, there was this club, but nothing else.
Okay.
Thank you.
There were a couple of questions on origin of the name, the origin of the railway, which you've covered very well, also on the drainage and the water supply. But there was one question, if you'd like to go into. Did your study include, or are there any memorable tidbits that you can share about the wildlife of Matheran?
Yes. So we were told that there are panthers that walk in the bazaar in the night. And we had heard stories. When we ventured into, and overall my group was sitting here today. When we reached Matheran for the first time and we were to go and stay in Tour Petit, I showed that bungalow which was belonging to the Petits. So Matheran Bachao Samiti arranged for us to stay there. And we camped there in the vacations for 1 full month. And for us, Mumbaiites, it was so difficult for us to number one, walk so much and come to the bazaar. For the tiniest of things, there were no cell phones. The most obscured kind of Xerox machines. The telephone was only in the bazaar. So for every little thing, we had to run. And in the night, there were no lights. So Tour Petit is right inside at Rugby Plateau. And we had to, so my group, they were students of first year, second year, third year, fourth year, different age groups. And I remember they used to be virtually afraid to walk those dark alleys, completely forested. And some of them would come back panting, and I would say, Piyush, what did you do? Why are you panting? And he was saying, I was afraid.
Okay.
And it became so quiet after 10 days or so, when some of the surrounding hotels started to have blaring music. We next day went to that hotel and said, please shut up, because you are disturbing us. And why don't you maintain the quiet? And so, it has been, so the anecdote about wild animals, so on our almost about the fifth, sixth run, we were trying to survey, the whole team was there, and we went up to, at about 5 o'clock, we went up to George Point. And we were going down, because most of these points today are not even accessed. People don't even know that you can go down. And we were accessing it. Suddenly, one of my friends who was a local in Matheran, she said, can you smell a cat? And I didn't understand her questions. I said, cat? What cat are you talking about? So she said, all right, let's go on. And we went on. And we came back from the point. And then she said, now it is very strong. And the moment she said that, there was a huge, and I'm not making tales, there was a huge roar. I think Sunita is sitting here listening to this. It was such a big roar. First, I looked up because it's the airplane path as well. The flights go over Matheran directly. So I looked up, there was no plane. And this friend of mine tells me, quickly group up, keep talking loudly, don't get segregated. It's a panther. And it followed us for almost about 15 minutes. We could not see it, but it was there. And by the time we came to a clearing, since then we were all mortally afraid. We wouldn't.
Wow.
There have been no incidents of any killings or any attacks. They would just simply creep up and take away your dogs. In the night, your dogs will vanish.
There was a question from somebody who obviously seems like a local. Carl wants to know, why are the grounds of Olympia extremely hollow? I'm not sure I understand what he means by extremely hollow, but probably you can answer that.
So I'm not too sure whether it was cleared. But practically speaking, from the geologist's reports, it is a geological condition. So it is rocky there, and it does not allow laterite to be present. So if you look at the geological, I could not talk about it, but the formation of the hill geologically is basaltic rock. And it is only on the hilltop that you have about 5 to 6 meters of a top layer, which is in laterite. So laterite as a stone is hollow, sponge-like. So it is weak in its strength, but eventually on oxidation, it gains a lot of strength and it becomes a very rich reserve for the forest to survive. So this is the geology.
Okay.
The ecological connection to the plains below is very significant. It is this sponge-like character of the laterite that stores the water in the rains. It holds it for a long time, slowly releases it in a way that the plains are not inundated.
Okay.
And that is why you have all the plains in the surrounding region, which become very nice water catchments. And so MMRDA in their regional plan, right at the initial level, they had called them green zones. And there was a definition of the green zone in the regional plan, which said that do not disturb it. I'm just saying it in short.
Okay.
It is this conservation zones that we identified as eco-sensitive zone.
So to add to the wildlife observation, we have Rupali, who's a naturalist. She reminds us that the butterfly known as the blue Mormon, which is also the state butterfly of Maharashtra, is a home, has a great home in Matheran, and also the Indian giant squirrel. Moving on, did your study include a survey of the medical conditions in Matheran? I know it's not heritage related, but that was a question. So in case you'd like to address it.
No, I would greatly like to add here. Right from day one, Hugh Point's mallet made it, in fact, all hill stations in the country, because they realized that they are needed to maintain the ecology and the environment in a pristine state, because the soldiers will come and recoup there. So to maintain the air quality.
Okay.
So what they did was they appointed superintendents of the hill stations, and all of them, as a criteria for appointment, they were medical officers.
Okay.
So the whole bunch of them were medical officers, and therefore they would create a huge amount of database, which they were supposed to do, day-to-day database.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the books that are now coming handy to us. So there's a day-to-day record of the entire journey till independence. Then we lost it. We didn't know how to protect it.
Okay. You're obviously not happy about that. I could see that in the later slides. We have Dr. Kurush Dalal, who's going to be a future speaker, telling us that he was involved in the restoration at the Hermitage. Moving on, somebody wanted to know who are the current owners of Hermitage, if that is public information and if you can share that.
I don't know the exact title of that ownership, but it is it is called the Sisters of the Hermitage, and it is connected to the church, the Church of North India. So that is what, but this can be availed. I have the information.
Okay. Was Cecil also a heritage property? That was another question.
Yes. So out of all the number of buildings which have been identified, I can kind of conclude and say that none of them have not been not listed.
Okay.
They are all listed.
Okay. There are many more questions, but we have to draw the line somewhere.
Sure.
One of the last couple of questions. Did Kipling ever live in Matheran?
I have no records of that,
Okay.
Farooq. But the only record we found in the Oliver's book was that he stayed for a while in Wallace Bungalow. But if he had connections with Wallace Bungalow, I'm sure he kept coming back.
Okay.
Because Matheran is a place which you cannot stay away from once you go there.
And the final question, it's you mentioned the cemeteries. Did you come across a Parsi cemetery there too?
Yes, yes. Yes, it's one of the most prominent, the most scenic, the most well-maintained. The cenotaphs and the burials are magnificent. Some of them are in marble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't show all the pictures.
Of course.
But yes, they are there. Even the Hindu crematorium has pavilions from the old times. They're highly ornate. And today, the Hindu crematorium also has an electrical crematorium. That's what Zenobia told me just a few days back.
And Zenobia is still sitting interestedly in the audience. I can see her right there.
Yes.
Sadly, we, Kirtida and our audience, we have to draw the line somewhere. It's nearly 9. It's 10 minutes to 9. We have to draw the line here. There are a few other questions and a lot of compliments on the detail and the depth. Here's one just coming in. Kashmira Besania says, excellent presentation.
She was part of the team. She was part of the team.
That's why she's cherishing the memories.
Yes. So I would welcome anybody who's interested in any future knowledge, understanding, borrowing of my books, looking at them. You're most welcome.
I think we'll have the archaeologist have the last word. Kurush Dalal says, fabulous presentation and a thankless job. Well done.
Thank you, Kurush. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Please do come for our future talks. We had them listed out in the beginning. So hoping to see you soon. Thank you, Kirtida, once again.
Thank you very much.